Today we're going to be learning Rosh Hashanah Daf Kaf Gimel. We're going to continue along in the witnesses, and we're going to start with the beacons that they would light, torches to tell people about the new moon, and then we're going to get back to how they accepted witnesses in the first place, what kind of questions they asked them. Okay, so here it goes. Our Mishna had said that they would, originally, they would light these beacons, these torches, and then eventually we changed that because of the mess up with the Shomronim, which we weren't sure exactly whether it was intentional or unintentional. It was causing confusion. Then we ended with saying, we brought this Breita that said they would only, 4 lines from the bottom of Kaf Bet and Bet, you would only do it on a 29-day month. If it was seen in its time, that means on day number 30. Then you would light the beacons. And then when would you light them? So again, let's just get it straight. 29 days. The night of the 30th, which is basically between 29 and 30. The night of the 30th, they see the new moon. They declare the new moon the next day during the day. So obviously they didn't light the torches the night before because they hadn't yet declared Rosh Chodesh. Only declare Rosh Chodesh in the morning. So, or sometime during the day. So that night, Le'ori Buro, that means, okay, I'm going to call these by the number of the past month. So we're now in day 30. Day 30 became day number 1. The night of the 31st is when we're actually, right, which is actually already day number 2 of the new month, is now going to be the day that we light the torches. And then everyone knows, even though you're lighting the torches today and you would think that means today is Rosh Chodesh. No. Everyone knows that means yesterday was declared Rosh Chodesh, and they know that today is already the second day of the new month. So now the Gemara says, wait, so you don't light the torches at all when it's a full, right? When it's a 30-day month, which means day number 31 they would declare Rosh Chodesh, and then theoretically they would light the torches the night of the 32nd. They don't do that. My time. What's the reason? What if Rosh Chodesh comes out day number 30 becomes Rosh Chodesh, and that happens on a Friday? So theoretically, you're supposed to light the torch Friday night. But you can't do that because it's Shabbos. So what do? You'll push it off to the next day. Well, now the people who see you lighting on the night of the 32nd, right? If every time we light on the 31st, we light these torches to say it was a 29-day month, and on the night of the 32nd, we like to say it was a 30-day month, then we're going to end up lighting on the night of the 32nd, and no one's going to know, are you lighting, right? So let's read it inside. Emat Avde, so when are you going to light that month? You're obviously going to light only on Motzei Shabbat. If we say you're also going to light every time there's a malay, and every time there's a chaser, every time there's a full month, and every time there's a not full month, a 29-day month, Atu limite, people will get confused. Amre, they're going to say either Hai chaserhu, maybe it was a 29-day month, and they really meant to light yesterday, but it was Shabbat, so they couldn't. Right? Really, the Rosh Chodesh was Friday. They couldn't light Friday night, so they were lighting Saturday night. Or Odilma Malehu, or maybe really Rosh Chodesh was declared on Shabbat. And then, ubizmano avid, and then we're doing it in its normal time, because you're supposed to anyway light the torches then Motzei Shabbat. Because of that, it's going to create confusion. So now the Gemara, in its classic way, suggests some alternatives. You could have done it like this, and everyone then would have known. How so? Uvile avid ben amalei ben chaser. Have it that in general, on a normal month, you light, whether it's malay, whether it's chaser, you light the torches in their regular night. You're only worried about this one case, right, where it's going to end up that Rosh Chodesh was Friday. And then you won't be able to do it on Shabbat, so do it Motzei Shabbat. So why don't you just decide the following? If Rosh Chodesh comes on Erev Shabbat, you just won't light it all, and everybody will know that then. In other words, as long as you make a rule book, it'll be very clear. So you just won't light that year. So you're going to light every month, whatever night it is, right? The night after Rosh Chodesh was declared, that's the night you're going to have the bonfires, the torches. Everyone's going to know. Perfect. In the event that Rosh Chodesh is Friday, and you can't announce it, and if you announce it, if you light those torches Saturday night, everyone will get confused. So just don't light. If it's lit Saturday night, everyone will know Rosh Chodesh was Shabbat. If they didn't see any bonfires at all, then they'll know. Oh, it was lit on any torches. Then everyone will know. Oh, it was Friday. Okay, that's a good solution. Except what's the problem? Very interesting problem. No. Even then, okay, I'm not sure if I read all the words, right? Lo lavi klav kevin to lavdina right adina na malay. Since they only do it on the malay, me de yade de chaseru. Everyone will know it's a chaser, but they say no. Afilu hachi ati lemite. Still going to cause confusion. Why? Amre hai malehu. They'll say maybe, right? So now you're sitting in your city on Saturday night. You don't see any torches. You say, likely it was chodesh chaser, really Friday. That's why. However, you have this concern in your mind, which is maybe Delo Avde for a different reason. Maybe it was really Malay. Maybe they were anusim. What does anusim mean? Something happened. Ones is always like something unexpected. Now, what was unexpected, and why is there more likelihood there'll be something unexpected on a night like this? Because it's Motzei Shabbat. And on Shabbat, people drink wine and people get drunk and people are not exactly with the program after Shabbat. So it could be that the people who were supposed to go up to the mountains and light their beacons, maybe those people got drunk and didn't go up. So not just saying that one time we're not going to light might create confusion as well. Because then it could be that there's some problem that they were drunk and they didn't light for that reason. That's why we're not worried about this in general. That's why we say we light on chaser, because theoretically you could ask the same question then. Why do we only light on months that are chaser and not malay? Maybe malay, the reason why, right? And then everyone knows if you didn't light, that's the reason. Maybe if you didn't light, something happened. But the assumption is really only on Motzei Shabbat are we going to be concerned for this, and therefore that's not a good solution. So now they say, a bunch of different ways to read this sentence and why they ask this now. I think the simplest way to understand this is not that this is connected to the ones. This is just a general question in general. If you're going to light on 1 month, on only chaser months and not malay months, only on 29-day months and not on 30-day months, why don't we just do the reverse? It seems a little arbitrary, right? You could have, for the same cost, why don't we just say, do it every time, light the torches when there's a 30-day month and not a 29-day month? Why did you choose to do it the other way? So, Amoraim, mishum bitul malacha la'am shnei yamim. We don't want the people not to do work for 2 days. Okay, now, what kind of not do work? What is he talking about? Rosh Chodesh, we don't work, right? Do you go to work on Rosh Chodesh? I go to work on Rosh Chodesh. So, what are we talking about here? So, Rashi says, we're talking about Rosh Hashanah. Okay? Says, we don't want, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, again, this is the time before they instituted the whole 2 days of Rosh Hashanah that we now do differently from 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. Right? Now we do it because we want to remember what was then. We know really the first day is the first day of the month because we know Elul is always Chaser, Rosh Hashanah always starts Aleph and Bet. Whereas Rosh Chodesh is always, right, 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, we have the first day is the last day of the previous month, Lamed, and the second day is the first day of the next month. So, why are they saying, what's this bitul malacha la'am? So, the first answer Rashi gives is it must be talking about Rosh Hashanah, and we don't want to make people keep Rosh Hashanah for 2 days. Basically, you'll be keeping Rosh Hashanah. The first day, maybe they made a new month. Second day, maybe they made a new month. Now, if we allow the witnesses to go out at the end of the first day, which is basically, right, if they declared the first day to be Rosh Hashanah, then the torches would be lit that night because it's already not holiday, so they could light the torches. Everyone would know that tomorrow they can do work and it's not the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So, because of that, that's why. But, okay, you're all, I see in the chat, getting to where Tosfot. Okay, you obviously must have read Tosfot or at least heard it from somewhere else. So, now we have Tosfot who says, what are you talking about, Rashi? Okay, he even says it in the language. If you look at it, the 7th line down in Tosfot, Ulechinam dachak lefaresh Rosh Hashanah. Rashi, for no reason, explained this as Rosh Hashanah. He could have easily explained that this is talking about every month. Because this refers to every Rosh Chodesh. It was customary. Okay, it wasn't like an Isur Melachalik from the Torah, but it was customary not to work on Rosh Chodesh. Here he seems to be talking about men also, and you'll see why in a minute, and we'll get to this in Megillah. This is why we read 4 aliyot on Rosh Chodesh. We read 4 aliyot on Rosh Chodesh because nobody's rushing to work because people didn't work. So you see from there that there was this issue that people didn't work on Rosh Chodesh. Now, Rashi says, though, if you're worried, because I saw some people write, what about a women's holiday? So Tosfot continues and says, U'regilin lomar shehosif hamakom yom tov l'nashim b'rosh chodesh. Okay, people generally say that that the women didn't do malacha was a special holiday for them on Rosh Chodesh. And why is that? Shelo v'sachar shelo nitretzu al ma'aseh ha'egel. Shamar le'am Aaron, he said, take off your jewelry, and the men had to take it, the women wouldn't give it, and because of that, they were given this extra holiday. That's one of the reasons given. Some people say that it connects with the Chodshei Levana, the cycle, that women have cycles, and that's something that's generally what women do. And, it's connected to the cycle of women. If they have a cycle, the moon has a cycle, and therefore this is a holiday specifically for women, and women don't do work. Now, what kind of work? They weren't going out to jobs. What do we mean by Isur Malacha? That's a whole other question. In other words, here we have this whole Isur Malacha. What is Isur Malacha? Right? Because generally we think of Isur Malacha, you can't write, you can't tie knots, you can't, all sorts of things that totally, So first of all, number one, what type of Isur Malacha? Likely we're talking maybe something a little bit more like Chol HaMoed, where it's a bit of a different Isur Malacha. All these issues are a little bit confusing. What exactly the Isur Malacha is. That's number one. Number two, we don't really see that people do this nowadays, right? It seems to have dissipated, this Isur Malacha. We see already in the time of Tosfot, it wasn't exactly clear. Is it for men? Is it for women only? Lack of clarity about that issue. And, like I said, people aren't really so careful about this nowadays. And what malacha are we talking about for the women? It's probably they didn't do the housework. Okay, right? That was really a holiday for them, right? They worked all day in the housework, doing all sorts of hard labor in the house. So that's probably what we're talking about. They didn't do, let's say drawing the water from the well, or, and then again, you have to worry. If they weren't doing housework, then how did the house function? Anyway, good question, right? These are all questions, things that are not exactly clear about this whole sugya. It's one of these issues that's a very unclear issue. What exactly malacha are we talking about? And anyway, it's interesting to see the Rashi and Tosfot have this debate. It seems maybe Rashi didn't know from such a thing, right? Maybe that's why he assumed it was Rosh Hashanah, and maybe where Tosfot, right, in the time of Tosfot, people weren't careful about this. Anyway, it's a whole interesting question. Okay, moving on. Right, and this, by the way, is in Megillah. It also comes up exactly this. What's this Yisro Malacha? We talk about Bitul Malacha and why there's 4 aliyot, etc. So, okay, I see people writing that I didn't follow all the chat, but there were slaves who maybe did some of the work, but not everybody had slaves. So it's also a question. Maybe only women who had slaves were able to afford not to work, and maybe that's why also it didn't stick, because maybe it just wasn't sustainable. Anyway, it's definitely likely, and if people didn't go to work every Rosh Chodesh, it also might not have been so sustainable. So anyway, the whole idea here, just so I explain the answer, because I got off on a tangent, but what was the answer? The answer is we don't want to push off and do it on the later date, because then people will wait around wondering, is it Rosh Chodesh or not? This way, if they know the first day is, then tomorrow already they'll go back to work, and they'll be able to, not have to take a day as not working. Okay, okay, this next section of the Gemara is going to be very hard to understand. I'll try to give you where I can some English words to define some of these things that might mean something to you. They might not mean something to you. Not all of them have good definitions of what they are. We're now going to try to determine, we're going to talk about the erez, the cedar wood, which was mentioned in the Mishna, that they would take a big branch of cedar. So, Amar Rav Yehuda, Arba Minei Arezim. There's 4 types of cedar. If you remember, we actually learned already in Yoma that there were 10 types of cedar, and we're going to see that in a minute. There's a debate whether 4 types of cedar, 10 types of cedar. Erez, Katrom, Et Shemen, Ubrosh. Okay, those are the 4 types. Erez is what we call cedar. Katrom, we don't really know what it is. Et Shemen, they say, is pine wood. And brosh is cypress. Okay, again, whenever people say these are what they are, it's not always clear cut. There could be different definitions in other places. I'm going by the Koren, and I find the Koren is very good with botany and that kind of thing when it comes to Rav Steingels was careful to always check with botanists, local, try to figure out what these things were. Doesn't mean there aren't mistakes, because we don't really know everything. Katrom. What is katrom? The Gemara asks. Amarav. Okay, this won't really help you, but for Rav, this was helpful. Adra. Debei Rabbi Shila Amrei Mavliga. Amrela Zogulmush. Okay, there's 3 different interpretations in there, Aramaic, which doesn't really help us, what exactly this type of tree was. Upliga de Rabba bar Rav Huna. This statement of Rav Yehuda that there's 4 types of cedar disagrees with Rabba bar Rav Huna. The Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amrei Beirav Asara minei arazim hem shenemar. There's 10 types of cedars. As it says, Etem b'midbar eret shita v'hadas et shemen asim ba'arava. Ve'et shemen. Okay, so I will put in the desert erez, shita, hadas ve'et shemen. That's 4. Asim ba'arava brosh. I will put in the arava brosh tidhar v'tashur yachdav. That's another 3. That comes out to 7, not 10. The Gemara is going to ask that in a minute. But they seem to assume that these are all different types of cedar. So now, again, we're going to get an explanation. What do all these mean? Erez, arza. Shita, tornita. Hadas, asa. That's one we know. That's hadasim, myrtle. Etz, shemen, afarsima. That's balsam, like an afarsimon tree. Brosh, brata. Tidhar, shaga. Tashur, shurivna. Okay, to which the Gemara says, Hanish shevahavu, but that's 7. That's not 10. How did you get to 10? Ki'ata Rav Dimi, we're going to have 2 different traditions now. When Rav Dimi came from Israel Amal, Hosifu alehem alonim, which they translate as cherubim, almonim, which is oak, and almugim, which is coral wood. We'll talk about the coral wood in another minute. Alonim, the Gemara says, is butme. Alonim are butme. Almonim are balute. It sounds like a bit of a, they all sound kind of the same, right? These 3 types. Almugim kesita. So, Amre, some people say no, it's aronim, armonim with an ayin, all the rest are with an aleph, this one's with an ayin, which aronim, they translate in the Koran as a bay tree, armonim is a plane tree, and almugim, which is again the coral wood. Aronim, are, with an ayin. Armonim, dove. Almugim, kesita. Again, these were ways they translated into the Aramaic that they understood. Now, okay, that was a whole list of 10 different types of cedar wood versus 4 different types of cedar wood according to Rav Yehuda. Whether they're telling us to know what exactly they used, what could have potentially used as this, or they're just using this opportunity to talk about these things. Now they're going to get off about these almugim. Now, here we're going to get one of those stories which is clearly exaggerated, and they want to talk about the exaggerated greatness of this type of wood, this coral wood. Vitzi adir lo ya'avirenu. This is a huge fleet will not be able to pass over this water. If you remember, this is a verse, comes from Yeshayahu, which talks about this. Actually, I thought, 1 second. This is where they describe, actually, I think it's not from the verses we saw there, but it describes, if you remember, we had this description of this in the future. There's going to be a river that comes out of Kodesh HaKodashim, and then the water's going to get so great, right? First it's going to be up to the knees, and then deeper, and then it's going to be so great that even a great fleet will not be able to pass through those waters. Okay, a great big boat. So Amarav, Zo Borni Gdola. This is a huge boat. Now, since they're talking about this, or probably they brought this because of that, Heichi Avti, they want to know, how did they get this coral out of the water? So, Maitu Shit Afe Gavre Betresa Yarche Shata. Okay, you can already hear the exaggeration. They would bring 6,000 men over a time period of 12 months. That's what it would take to get this coral wood out of the water. V'amrela, some people say that the details were a little flipped. Tresar alfe gavre b'shite yarche shate. It was 12,000 men in a period of 6 months. So it's either 6,000 a period of 12 months or 12,000 a period of 6 months. You can see where the confusion would rise. V'tane lechala ad deshachna. They would put in this big boat sand, so much sand until the boat sank to the bottom of the water. While the boat was at the bottom, I read that. V'nachi bar Amorai. So then these divers would go down into the water. V'katar atune dekitana bekasita. They would tie around. Remember, the kasita is the almog. So they would tie ropes that were made of flax around the wood that was on the bottom of the sea. V'katar lehu b'sfinata. And then they would tie the other end of it to the boat. Then what would they do? You can probably guess. Not lechala v'shadu lebarai. They took all the sand out of the boat, dumped it off the boat. V'kama d'midalia, as it would rise up, akra umat, it would pull up the wood with it, and then they would be able to get it out. Now, once we got the wood out, now it's going to talk about how amazing this wood was. It was very expensive wood. First of all, if it took that to get it out, you would imagine it would cost a lot of money. It would be valuable, because otherwise, why would you go through all that process? So they say, it was worth double its weight in silver. In other words, 2 times the weight of silver, right? You would say this weighs X amount, right? 1 kilo. For every 1 kilo, it's worth 2 kilo in silver. Tlat Parvata Havyan. There were 3 ports at the time. Tarte Be'aramai, 2 belonged to the Romans. V'chad de Be'parsai, 1 to the Persians. De Be'aramai maskin kasita. In the port of the Romans, they would sell this kasita. They would take this kasita out of the water and sell it. De Be'parsai maskin marganita. They would sell pearls. Umikaria Parvata Dimashik. The one of the Persians is called the royal port. Okay, because there they would sell the pearls. And that was a big story why they told us this. I'm not really sure why, but they want to tell you about the unique nature of this coral wood. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now Rabbi Yochanan's going to start with this verse that we started in the beginning about how many different types of cedar was there. And we quoted this pasuk about the 10 types, which really only had 7 in them, that said, Etem b'midbar eretz shita. I will put in the desert, I will plant the following trees. So Rabbi Yochanan darshans this pasuk and says, Kol shita v'shita shenatlu nochlu Yerushalayim, atir kadosh baruch hu lachziran la. Okay, all the rows of trees that existed in the time of the temple when it was destroyed, God is going to bring all of those back. He's going to replant them for us. Shene'emar, how do we know this? Because it says, Etem b'midbar eretz shita. They darshan there from the word shita. And Etem b'midbar, what is a midbar? A midbar, Eli Yerushalayim. Jerusalem is a desert. Why is Jerusalem called a desert? Shene'emar, Tzion midbar hayata. This is just describing the destruction. It became desolate, right? It was a desert. There's nothing growing there. So when God says, I'm going to bring into the desert, what he means is I'm going to take into a place that all the trees were taken from, I'm going to bring them all back. So that's a miraculous thing that God is going to bring back the trees that were destroyed then. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, other things Rabbi Yochanan is going to learn from that pasuk, and from there we're going to get off into topic about the importance of teaching Torah. Kol halomed Torah ve'eino melamda. Anyone who learns Torah but doesn't teach it, domeh lahadas b'midbar. He's like a beautiful myrtle branch in the desert. Nobody appreciates it, right? You can have Torah, you can learn it. But if you don't pass it on to other people, it's like this beautiful thing in the middle of nothingness. However, some people say it the reverse. Kol halomed Torah u'melamda b'makom she'ein talmid chacham. If you're living in a place where there's no other talmidei chachamim and you teach Torah there, that is domeh lahadas b'midbar, d'chaviv. This is looked at as a beautiful thing. It's like putting this beautiful myrtle branch in the middle of a desert where there's nothing and there's no Torah going on. There are people. Right? The first one assumed there were no people to appreciate it. Here it's saying, no, there's people and you're giving them something that no one else can give them because they're living in a place where there's no Talmidei Chachamim. So either which way you look at it, it's talking about the importance of teaching Torah, whether it's people who have no one to learn Torah from or whether it's for just teaching in general. And that it's almost saying, the first one is saying the whole point of learning Torah is to be able to pass it on to others. And if you don't do that, it's almost like you're missing something, right? You haven't gotten there. For all those who aren't Torah teachers, don't worry. There's always time, right? And there's ways of teaching that doesn't have to be formal teaching, just talking about it at your table, passing it on to others, that's already part of the teaching process. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Oy lahem le'ovdei kochavim. By the way, it's a good plug for being active in your Hadron WhatsApp groups, right? The more you talk about your Torah and pass it on to others, it's a good thing. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, oy lahem le'ovdei kochavim she'en lahem takana. In this context of the importance of Talmidei Chachamim, he says, woe is to the Gentiles that they will never have a way to fix what they have done. We're going to see in a minute what they did. Shene'emar, tachat hanechoshet. Okay, this is a verse in Yeshayahu. In place of nechoshet avi zahav, I will bring gold. Tachat abrazel, in place of the iron, I will avi kesef, I'll bring silver. Tachat haitzim nechoshet, instead of the haitzim, you'll have copper. Tachat avanim barzel, in place of stones, you'll have the iron. Okay, this is basically, things will be better. Tachat Rabbi Akiva v'chaverav mai mevi'in. But you can't replace Rabbi Akiva and his friends and the Romans, as you know from the stories we have of the 10 Harugei Malchut, right? Whether it was 10 or more or less, right? It's almost a bit of a story, that whole thing. But they killed a lot of the Talmidei Chachamim, and as a result of that, we lost our big teachers, and there's no replacement for that, and therefore they will, right? So there's all these things will be replaced, right? The gold, the silver, or it will be turned into gold, right? And this, but there's no replacement for these Talmidei Chachamim, these amazing teachers that we had, and therefore there's no way to fix what the Gentiles did. Almost there, and Alehem hu omer v'niketi damam lo niketi. Niketi damam lo niketi means some blood can be cleansed, some blood can't be cleansed, and their blood they shed here will never be able to be cleansed. Okay, back to our topic. We got very sidetracked, okay? We got sidetracked into different types of woods. From there, we got sidetracked because of those verses into what they reflected, right? That there was something more to it than just the wood in those verses, but it was all about God bringing back things that were taken away from us, and also the importance of teaching Torah, even in, let's say, the desert or something like that. And now we're going to move on back to our Mishnah. Uminayin ayu mesi'im mesuot. And one of the things was Beit Baltin. Right, so the last place was Beit Baltin, and it said in the Mishnah there, I'll read it again so that you see, because we're going to darshan it right now. So remember, they did it, and again, if you haven't read Shuli Mishkan's article, I highly recommend reading it, which gives a bit of where these places are, what we know about them, how they did it. It talks about some history about the Romans, how other people used beacons as ways of, in history, as ways of passing on information. Just talks about the importance of I talked yesterday about the Molicho Mevi Maleo Molid, how Safrai says it almost sounds like it was a ritual. And the ritual also connected with fire. Fire is a big ritual item. And in different rituals, there's use of fire, so also connection of fire possibly. Anyway, you can read the article for more information. The last thing we saw here, you can find it on the homepage of Hadran. Umi Beit Baltin Lozazu Mishan, Ela Molicho Mevi Maleo Molid. So again, he would do this, they would wave the torches there. We're going to have to explain what that means. Until they saw all of the golah, the exile, which obviously doesn't mean all of the exile, likely means Babylonia, although even that is very difficult because it was very far from Babylonia. You can actually see, if you have the Koran, there's a map, which kind of shows where they are, and you see how far, right? You see that the mountains in Israel aren't so far away from each other. I mean, they are to a certain extent, as Shuli said in her article, that they tested it out and you really couldn't see from one to the other, but all the more so, getting all the way to Babylonia sounds very exaggerated. It would be hard pressed to know that they could really see from there. Again, it could be there were other stops along the way and they just didn't mention them because they were mentioning the important places, just like we had yesterday. I think it was yesterday with Rabbi Nechunya, and we said, why didn't we mention who was with him? Rabbi Nehorai. We said, because he was so important, they just didn't bother mentioning the less important person. It could be all the places in between there and there were not considered significant places. The rabbis were either in Israel or Babylonia. Yes, there were people who lived in between, and maybe they lit torches as well. But we don't mention them because they're not as important. Maybe that's why. And then what does it mean that it all looked like it was a big lit up fire? So first I want to know where Beit Biltin is. So my Beit Biltin, Amarav, Zo Biram. Okay, again, it doesn't really help us, but this is a place called Biram. My Gola, what's the Gola? Amarav Yosef, Zo Pumbedita. In case you didn't know, that's Pumbedita. Okay, that's one of the big cities in Pumbedita where there was a big yeshiva. That's where it is, in Bavel. My Kimedurata Esh, what does it mean it looked like a big bonfire? Tana Kolacha Ve'echad, the Braita says, a Braita, Kolacha Ve'echad Notel Avuka Biyadova Olel Rosh Kago. In Bavel, everybody would get up onto their roofs and light a torch. Okay, again, if we talk about ritual, this sounds like a ritual of basically, where everybody wanted to be involved in the ritual. And in Babylonia, they all got up on top of their roofs. I want to point out something about Biram, right? Ruth wrote me in the chat, and it's good that you mentioned because I forgot to mention this. There's actually a debate about Biram. Okay, Ruth, you mentioned one opinion, which is it was the closest city to Babylonia in Israel. Some people claim it was actually outside of Israel. There's a debate about where exactly it was. Was it in Israel proper or was it not in Israel proper? That's also a matter of debate. So it's not so clear where it is. Okay, next. That's always the issue when you read a commentary, right? They're giving you one opinion and you don't always see all the opinions that exist. I mean, not that I get to see them all either, but okay, next. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who remembers him? He came up in Beitza a lot. He always had a bit of a different version of what the Machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel was. Remember that? So here also he's going to have a different version than our Mishnah. He doesn't say he disagrees with our Mishnah, but he says in addition, it wasn't just the places listed, but Af Charim Uchial Ugdor V'Chevroteha. Also these cities. Now, it's not really clear where these cities are. Some people think Geder is like Hamat Gader, which is near Tiberia. And then it would be in line with the places that we saw. We're going to see right now there's two approaches to understanding this. Some people understood that what was Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar mentioning? Beini havu kaimei. These were smaller mountains in between, right? Sartaba, the one that's the second one, was a huge mountain, right? It's very big. You can see it now. You can go visit there. In fact, Julie, who's in our shir, sent pictures on Sukkot. She had gone to visit there. It's one thing my family has been talking about for years, that we want to go hike there. So Sartaba is a huge mountain. These other ones were probably smaller mountains on the way. So the Mishna mentioned the big ones, and there were a few in between as well, and that would answer the question of those who tried in 67. I mentioned yesterday that Shuli talks about that tried to do it and failed, right? They couldn't see from one to the other. Maybe that's why. Some people say they were on the other side of Israel, okay, probably on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, and that there were two different lines. They dig torches here and they did torches there. Okay, and then it was just in a different location. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ben kol achat ve'echad shmona parsaot. There's 8 parsaot in between each. So kama havahavu kama, how much altogether? Taltin v'tartin, 32. Now they say v'ha'id not tu v'havu, but again the facts don't match up. Okay, again Rabbi Yochanan is in Eretz Yisrael, so you would think his facts match up, but the Gemara asks, but that's not true. It's definitely more than 32 parsaot between these mountains. So he says, Amoraim istatum lehu darche. It must be that the paths that were, again, Abai is living in Bavel, so it's interesting, he's talking about what happened in Israel, but he says the paths that existed then were more direct paths, and now you can't go straight, so it's much longer than 32 parsaot, but theoretically it could be, like in a bird's eye view, and in those days maybe they were able to go, and it was really 32 parsaot. How do we know that istatum lehu darche? Proves it from a verse. Okay, there's a pasuk from Moshe. Sach et arkech b'sirim. Okay, it doesn't mean pots like a seer means, but it means I'm going to put thorns in your way. In other words, there's going to be all these thorns around. You won't be able to get through there. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak brings a different pasuk. Nehacha dichtiv netivotai iva. Okay, I made this is from Eicha. Gadar drachai begazit netivotai iva. He basically caused your paths to be not straight. Okay, so again, you could understand this literally as the paths became blocked and then they couldn't go directly anymore, and therefore it was longer than it seems. Again, it's always just a question, what is really the reality? Maybe they didn't know what the reality was. Maybe they weren't living there either, so it was hard to know. Okay, now we're going to continue on. Chatzir Gedolai Tabi Yerushalayim. This is all part of these descriptions about descriptive mishnayot, like we had in Yoma, like we had in the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, where you really feel like you're there, right? You can imagine the details. So here we really get into detail. There was this big courtyard in Jerusalem, Beit Yazek, that was its name, and l'sham kol ha'edim mitkansim. Okay, that's where all the witnesses would gather, and Beit Din bodkim otam sham. I would imagine. Now you have to remember, we talked about yesterday that this type of testimony was maybe a little bit different than other testimony, and I think here you also see a difference. They didn't go to a courthouse because there were probably too many people to go to a courthouse. Normally you have a case, you have 2 witnesses, maybe 4 witnesses, maybe 6. You're not going to have hundreds of witnesses. Here, theoretically, hundreds of people could have come from around the country to testify. So what did they do? L'sham kol ha'edim mitkansim, Beit Din bodkim otam sham. So the Beit Din would ask them all their questions there. Usu'udot gedolot osin lahem b'shvil shiyu regilin lavo. Classic Jewish thing. Bring food, people will come, right? We all know that. If you have a shir and there's food, more likely people will come than just if you have a shir, right? So they made these big festive meals so that everybody would come. Okay, then. Barishona lo hayu zazim misham kol hayom. Now, we have a halachic problem though, which is all these people that came on Shabbat left techum Shabbat. Okay, maybe not everyone, but anyone who left their techum Shabbat to get there, right, if they weren't locals. So we already said you could be mechalel Shabbat for certain months. So they got there, it was totally permitted. But the law is, I don't know if you remember this, but if you leave the techum Shabbat, you cannot leave where you are. Okay, you can't leave. Even that's it, you're stuck. You can't leave that space. Even if you're allowed to go there, you're stuck in that space for the rest of Shabbat. So, basically, these people would have to stay there all day, which is also probably why they brought them food, right? They're going to be here all day, stuck, so they gave them food. However, I don't know who made the food and on whose Cheshvan this was, maybe the courts, I don't know. So Rabban Gamliel said, you know what? Again, Rabban Gamliel he was trying to figure out how to allow everybody to come. Remember, he got upset with the people who stopped the witnesses from coming. He's always worried that people won't come and testify in the court. He said, you could go 2,000 cubits in all directions. V'lo elu bilvad, not only these people. So basically, you're going to be treated like the people of the city. Okay, you're not going to be stuck in this courtyard. You can go 2,000 cubits in any direction, like the people of the city. You can't go all the way home if your home is farther than that, but at least you're not stuck right here. So now, lo elu bilvad, he didn't make he didn't institute this change only for these people, but even for av chachama haba lialed, a midwife, haba latzim and adleka, firefighter who comes to save people from a fire, min agayis, from the enemy, right, like soldiers, min nahar, from a flood, to save the people, min mapolet, if a big avalanche happened and things fell on people. So the Rabban Gamliel, as I can institute for all these people, that you should be able to go 2,000 cubits from that city, wherever you were called in to come to, so that, right, these are all people that need encouragement, or certainly shouldn't be discouraged to come by thinking, oh, I'll be stuck there for all of Shabbat. Again, it doesn't actually get you all the way home. Now they have an interesting question. The word Beit Yazek. Is it Beit Yazek Tanan or Beit Yazek Tanan? Now, if you're not looking inside, you won't know what they mean, so I'll spell it out. Is it Yud Ayin Zayin Kuf, or is it just Yud Zayin Kuf? Now, what's the relevance? Well, it's a matter of what's the etymology of the word. Beit Yazek Tanan. Is it Beit Yazek with an Ayin and Lishana Me'al Yehu? And that's a nice language. Dichtiv Vayazkeu Vayisakleu. So here it's he dug, right, Vayazkeu, I can't remember what the translation was. He dug it. Okay, this is, if you remember, Vayisakleu is where you take out the stones, right, to fix up the land. So he dug it, and then he took out the stones and he beautified it. So then Yazek is a positive word, and it would be positive because there were these big su'udot going on. Or Dilma Beit Yazek Tanan, Yazek Milashon Nezek, damages. Okay, or actually not damages, but Lishana Ditzalahu, it's an actual, like a language of pain. You're handcuffed. Azikim are handcuffs. You're bound. You're stuck here. Okay, so not really nezek, as I said, but probably it comes from a similar root where it's a negative word. So Amar Abai Tashmasu Doktorari Osin Lahem Sham Kadeshu Regilin Lavo. It sounds like it was a festive place. Beit Yazek, there were meals. It was fun. It was nice. Gemara rejects it and says, no, Dilma Tarte Avo Avdubu. But it had two aspects to it. One is that it was festive. Two is that people were stuck there. So, like tied up and handcuffed there because they couldn't leave because of the techum issue. So, theoretically, it could be that its name connotes negative. Maybe also it connotes both, negative and positive, and the combination of the two. Okay, next section. And this is a little bit difficult. I'll tell you why. We're going to now see how did they check the witnesses. And the difficult part is going to be to understand what questions they asked about the moon and the sun. The difficulty partially is that the way they believed everything worked was not the way we know it to be true today, right? They thought that everything revolved around the earth, okay? So that the sun revolved around the earth, which we now know not to be true. Some of these questions might be based on that. There's much written on this, what these questions mean, what the options are. It's very confusing. I'll try to keep it, as I said, simple, but know that there's many different interpretations. And we'll use the pictures from the Morot Hayomi, which will be helpful. So I already put up the pictures here. You can see that there's pictures of, there's pictures here of the boat. Okay, that's a Borneo, and you can see, they have these ropes tied from it, although it's not at the bottom of the sea. I'm not sure why. Okay, now we're going to start with our pic. Okay, so I'll put up the pictures even though we're not there yet. Ketzad bodkim et ha'edim. How would they check the witnesses? Zug Shabbat Rishon bodkin oto Rishon. So it's first come, first serve. You showed up there first, you're the first one who's going to be asked. Umachnisim et hagadol shebahem. They bring in the biggest of the dayanim, because this is done in the Sanhedrin of 71. V'omrim lo emor, and then they say to him, Ketzad ra'ita et halevana. How did you see the moon? What did it look like? Okay, I just want to check 1 second. Oh, sorry, my mistake. The Gedolim is they bring in the biggest of the witnesses. Okay, in other words, there's two witnesses. They bring in the more prominent one, or I'm not sure exactly what, maybe the older one. They bring in the first one of the two. And they say to him, Emor ketzad ra'ita et levana. How did it look like? Lifnei chama or la'achar chama? Was it before the sun or after the sun? So here in the picture they show, okay, which we're going to see. Okay, if you look at the bottom, there's a guide here. Safon is north is to the right, south is to the left, and the sun is setting. If you see on the left side, on the darom side. So lifnei chama means you see before the sun, meaning if you're looking north south, you would see the moon first. Okay. The problem with this, the Gemara is going to ask, is because the next question is litzfona or lidroma. Was it to the north or to the south? So that seems to be the same question. So we'll get to that later. But right now we assume lifnei chama means, is it on the, did you see it more north or more south of the sun? Okay, here's the next picture, picture 16, which is that the sun is on the north side and the moon is acharei chama, which is toward the south. Right, so you see here, it's also which way it's facing. It's a little confusing again, which one exactly this is. So, right, is it to which direction does it lean? Kama haya gavoa, how tall was it? Meaning how high off the ground it was. So in picture 17, you see a few, right? Rashi says, right, mina aretz lefi re'ut enechem, right? From your perspective, obviously it's all relative. So it's a little bit of a tricky question to say it was high, it was low in the horizon. V'kama haya rachav, how wide was it? Okay, how wide was the, there's no picture of. Okay, how wide, right, the moon, you see just a sliver. How wide was the sliver? Im amar lifnei chama lo amar klum. Now, if he said he saw it before the sun, he didn't say anything, that definitely can't be true. We're going to have to see what this is in the Gemara. So first of all, it was to see, did they see the same thing? And some of the questions we would be able to know that they were actually lying. Okay, so if he said it was lachar chama, lifnei chama, before the sun, then for sure he didn't say anything. We'll get to the Gemara what this means. After that question, the first one, right? You have to make sure all their testimony lines up, that they described it in the same way. Some of it isn't, right? There's a footnote in the Koran which explains that the rabbis really knew what the new moon was supposed to look like and how it looked, and they wanted to check that what was seen was actually matched. Like they had their own calculation and wanted to make sure it went with their calculation of how they thought things were supposed to appear. Some of it was just to make sure that they were both saying the same thing, because they said we saw this together, and then one describes something totally opposite, then obviously someone's lying. Ushar kol hazagot. Now, what do they do with all the rest? If, let's say, tivreihem mechuvanim, so they say this is Rosh Chodesh. Now all these other witnesses came. So what they do? Okay, they start asking them basic questions. Right? We don't want to discourage them from coming again, so we ask them. We don't ask them all the questions and all the details, but we ask them a little bit just to make them feel good, right? that we're considering what they said. Otherwise, they're not going to come back again. We keep going back to that issue that there was this concern that people wouldn't come. So now the Gemara says, Hainu lifnei chama, hainu litzvona, hainu la'achar chama, hainu lidroma. It sounds like the exact same thing as we described before. So what possibly could you be saying? So Amar Abai pegimata lifnei chama o la'achar chama. Is the part of the moon that you don't see, right? The darkened part is the crescent. Is it facing toward the sun or away from the sun? Okay. Im amar lifnei chama lo amar klum. If you're saying that the concave part was facing toward the sun, then for sure you're lying. Why is that? Because the sun always lights up the moon. So it obviously wouldn't be dark, the part that's facing the moon. Okay, so here's the picture of, right, to which direction is the p'gima facing? Is it facing north? Is it facing south? Is it, right, that was litzfona or lidroma. But lifnei or acharei, is it facing, right, is here. Here's a picture of p'gimata acharei chama, which would mean, here you can see, in picture 20, on the right, that is the concave part is away from the sun. According to P'gimata Lifnei Chama, it would be facing toward the sun, which again, it would be lit up because the sun lights it up. So it's definitely an impossibility. Now, Gemara doesn't say it's an impossibility because of what we know to be true astronomically. They explain it from Psukim. To Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my dechtiv hamshel b'pachad imo, oseh shalom b'marav. God is so great that He makes peace in the heavens. What does it mean He makes peace in the heavens? He makes peace between all the sun and the moon. Now, we know there's this legend about the sun and the moon, right? And basically the moon, they both wanted to rule, and then the moon says, I'll make myself smaller, and but he's embarrassed about the fact that he's not always seen. So, me'olam lo ra'ata chama p'gimata shel levona v'lo p'gimata shel keshet. Never was that the sun, now again, we could explain this from a physics perspective, right? From the way the light hits and all that, we can explain it. But the sun never saw the darkened part of the moon and never the inner part of the rainbow. So why is that? Because the moon will be embarrassed in front of the sun, right? He doesn't want to show his weaknesses to the sun. He wants to look like, oh, I'm as glorious as you are. And that keeps them friends, right? Shalom in the Romim. The people who worship the sun won't say Gire Kamashadya. If the sun is on the inside of the part of the rainbow, right? If the rainbow kind of goes around it, it'll look like a bow and arrow, and it looks like the sun is shooting arrows out to everything else. So we'll show that those who believe in the sun will, they win, they're triumphant. So we don't want to ever have that happen, and that's why it will never be the case, right? Obviously, there's scientific reasons why it won't be the case, but that's how the Gemara explains the reason. With that, we will finish for today, and like I said, there's a lot of different opinions about all these things and what they mean. I tried to explain it according to one of the interpretations that I found to make the most sense, but there are other ways to look at it, so if someone wants to go delve in depth, feel free. Have a great day.